The creak of wooden floorboards echoes through a packed courtroom. A gavel slams, sharp as a rifle shot. Dust motes drift in the sunlight cutting through tall windows. Onlookers lean forward, straining to hear. The case before the court today? The American West. Welcome to Dark Dialogue, Gallows and Gunfights. This is where the Old West stands trial. Not the West that you saw on Saturday matinees, where sheriffs wore white hats, outlaws wore black ones, and justice rode in right on schedule, but the real West, the bloody, complicated West. The West where the same man might be a lawman one year, outlaw the next, where corruption wore a badge as often as it drew a six-shooter, and where myth has replaced fact for far too long. This is the newest show in the Dark Dialogue family. If the flagship digs into unsolved crimes and modern mysteries, and Rocky Mountain Reckoning reconstructs cold cases on the frontier, Gallows and Gunfights is about peeling back the legend of the Old West and putting it under oath. The format is simple. We treat history like testimony. Every story is a case. Every outlaw, lawman, cattle baron, and gunslinger takes the stand in the court of history. The evidence? Court records, depositions, eyewitness accounts, and the bloody paper trail left in their wake. And you, the listener, sit in the gallery, jury to it all. Because, let's be clear, the history you've been told isn't always the history that really was. Hollywood gave us John Wayne riding tall, Gary Cooper standing fearless at high noon, Clint Eastwood drifting into town with justice and vengeance in equal measure. These are powerful myths, but the true stories? They're far murkier and far darker. Take Billy the Kid. You've heard the name, a boy outlaw, a desperado with a cherubic grin, a killer of men shot dead at 21 by the long arm of the law. That's the story anyway. But look closer. In February 1878, Billy wasn't an outlaw at all. He was a deputized lawman sworn in as a constable, badge pinned to his chest. Legally authorized to serve arrest warrants, he rode not as a fugitive, but as an officer of the court. A month later, the same territorial government stripped that authority away, and the very same man became a wanted criminal. Which Billy was real? The outlaw or the lawman? Or was he both? Or Wyatt Earp? Tombstone made him famous as the stoic marshal who faced down the cowboys at the OK Corral. But years earlier in Wichita, Kansas, Wyatt had been arrested for stealing a horse. In Dodge City, he was fined for running illegal gambling operations. And after Tombstone, he drifted into bounty hunting, race fixing, and shady oil deals. Hero, hustler, or hired gun? Depends on who you ask and when you ask. Pat Garrett, the man who killed Billy the Kid, was hailed as the law's savior in New Mexico, but Garrett was no pure knight in shining spurs. He was accused of intimidating voters, stealing cattle, and working backroom deals with the very outlaws that he was supposed to stop. His famous biography of Billy the Kid? Ghostwritten, sensationalized, and likely a self-serving work of fiction. Was Garrett the honest sheriff, or just another player in the same bloody game? Even Wild Bill Hickok, the archetype of the gunfighter lawman, lived on both sides of the badge. In Kansas, he wore a star, enforcing law with his pistols. In Missouri, he made his living as a gambler and a gun for hire. He killed some men under the color of law, others over debts or drunken quarrels. He was admired for his charm and feared for his hair-trigger temper. The truth? He was all of it at once. That's the theme we'll return to again and again in Gallows and Gunfights. The West wasn't a morality play. It was a chessboard where law, politics, money, and violence intersected. And the same men who stood as guardians of order often thrived in the shadows of disorder. Nowhere is this clearer than in New Mexico's Lincoln County War. On paper, it was a business dispute. one mercantile monopoly against another upstart competitor. In reality, it was a battlefield where hired guns, politicians, sheriffs, and future legends of outlawry carved Lincoln County into graves. The conflict birthed the Regulators, half deputies, half vigilantes, who swore to avenge a murdered rancher named John Tunstall. Among them, Billy the Kid. On the other side stood the House, an Irish mercantile monopoly led by Lawrence Murphy, James Dolan, and John Riley, backed by the Santa Fe Ring, the most powerful cabal of lawyers and politicians in the territory. Their allies? Sheriffs William Brady, judges willing to sign away justice, and hired guns like Jesse Evans' Boys and John Kinney's Rio Grande Posse. The Lincoln County War was not good versus evil. It was monopoly versus competition, corruption versus resistance, with plenty of blood spilled on both sides. And it is here, in this war, that Billy the Kid stepped onto the stage, not yet as a legend, but as a pawn in a much bigger game. Over the course of this arc, we will call to the stand every major figure: Dolan, Murphy, Riley, McSween, Tunstall, Brady, Chisholm, Dudley, Catrone, Axtell, and of course, Billy himself. We'll cross-examine their lives, their choices, their crimes, and their alliances. We'll weigh the testimony of survivors like George Coe, the memoirs of Susan McSween, and the damning reports of investigators like Frank Agnell. And we'll ask the central question: was there ever truly a difference between outlaw and lawman in Lincoln County, or in the Old West at all? Because when a man could be a deputy on Monday and an outlaw by Friday and a sheriff the next year, what does justice even mean? This is where Gallows and Gunfights begins. The courtroom is open. The jury is seated. The Old West is under oath. Court is now in session. Hey, Angela. How's it going today?
Hi, John. It's good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm great, actually. Zero complaints.
3 days in a row, you can say great, 0 complaints.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, huh?
I'm liking it.
I'm not complaining either. So, what are your thoughts on this new endeavor I cooked up?
I am interested. I'm a little upset that you're going to be shattering the illusions that I have on some of these people. Because some of the illusions are fun.
They are fun. And prerequisite, have you seen Young Guns?
No.
Oh my God.
Should I leave again?
Get out.
Get out, right?
I can't believe you haven't seen Young Guns.
I probably have when I was really, really little.
They're getting ready to make it. Young Guns 3.
Wow.
With Emilio Estevez, Lou Diamond Phillips.
Really?
Yeah.
They're coming back, huh?
Yeah. And what's his nuts, too, from Pump Up the Volume. And
Christian Slater?
Yeah.
I've seen that one.
Unfortunately, Kiefer Sutherland doesn't seem to be in the lineup, but other than that...
Maybe he doesn't want to.
But still, pretty damn good to get those 3 back after this many years. I mean, I can't remember when it came out, but it was the 80s.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, so I probably have seen it, like, with my family watching it, and I just was coloring and not paying attention.
Such a good...
But not recently.
Very good movie.
Not enough to quote it.
So for you and the rest of the listeners that haven't, I would suggest watching it, because I'm going to be referring to that movie throughout this arc on Billy the Kid.
Okay.
Because it is actually...
That does not help me now, John.
It is actually pretty freaking historically accurate. I mean, Hollywood took some liberties in it for sure, but it's pretty historically accurate. Young Guns 2... a little less accurate, but still.
I will say, this is information you probably should have told me yesterday, so I would have watched it last night and been prepared.
What movie is that from?
What?
This would have been good information yesterday.
I don't know.
I'm gonna have to think on that, because that is definitely...
I thought I was about to be in trouble.
So... Anyway, you ready to
Spending my life in trouble.
Learn all about this?
I feel like we need to get you a gavel.
We might need to. Yeah, we might need to. So, listeners, welcome to Dark Dialogue, Gallows and Gunfights, the show where the Old West takes the witness stand and every outlaw, lawman, and forgotten soul is put on trial by history.
We're not here to retell dime novel myths or Hollywood legends. We're here to dig into the records, the testimonies, and the messy truth, where the line between lawman and outlaw was often paper thin.
Exactly. In this courtroom of the past, reputations rise and fall. Some who wore badges also broke laws. Some branded as outlaws were simply survivors of a corrupt system. We're here to separate myth from evidence.
And before we dive into today's case, let's remind you, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss a session. It's free.
It's free. Exactly. And if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. If you're on Spotify or Apple, leave us a review. And wherever you are, share this show with someone who loves the Old West, the real Wild West, not the polished version. Not
the Will Smith's Wild Wild West version?
Oh my God, that movie just as good as Young Guns was,
it just made him make faces.
Is as bad as that dumbass freaking movie was. That thing is terrible.
It was supposed to be. It's like anything Mel Brooks does. It's supposed to be.
No, Mel Brooks movies are at least comical.
That's true.
Funny, and I mean, they would never be made today because they tread the line of political correctness. And that movie just sucked. It just was dumb.
I was more so talking about his music video, though.
I don't know anything about that.
Anyway, moving on. Your support spreads the word, grows this community, and keeps us bringing these cases to light.
Now, court is in session. Today we turn to Lincoln County, New Mexico, where a young Englishman named John Henry Tunstall dared to challenge the monopoly of Murphy and Dolan and paid with his life.
His murder lit the spark for one of the bloodiest conflicts in frontier history, the Lincoln County War. And from those ashes rose a figure who would become both legend and lightning rod, Billy the Kid.
So, Angela, why don't you start us off with a little location information, which is as much a surprise to you as it is for everyone else but me.
Oh, I love that. A little, like I'm sitting here going pages. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I give you a little bit to read.
Just a little.
You're out of practice. I think you need to practice.
Oh, you are a slave driver.
I know.
New York City in 1959 was not the towering... No!
Pretty sure it was 18.
Dad, blast it, John! I will read what I want to.
I mean, unless we're going to tell the listeners that Billy the Kid was like a greaser fighting with the Socias or something like that.
Bloods and Crips and whatnot, you know? All right, we'll do it John's way. I'll read it correctly. Let's make it bigger because apparently I'm old and I can't see the words. New York City in 1859.
Thank you.
Was not the towering metropolis we know today, but it was already a restless giant. The city was swelling with immigrants, industry, and innovation, while simmering with tension, poverty, and violence. It was here, in this turbulent environment, that Henry McCarty, better known to history as Billy the Kid, was born into the Irish immigrant community of the Lower East Side. By the late 1850s, New York was rapidly expanding northward. The Croton Aqueduct?
I think so, Croton, I think.
Croton Aqueduct had begun supplying clean water. The Otis elevator made taller buildings possible, and Central Park opened to the public in 1859. The same year, Billy the Kid entered the world. But while the city's elites strolled landscaped paths uptown, and Lower East Side was a different story. The Lower East Side was a different story. Tenements, cellars, and alleys crammed with poor immigrant families, many living in conditions that bred disease and despair. The contrast between polished wealth and grinding poverty defined the city's atmosphere. The city was alive with conflict. 5 Points was infamous as a cauldron of gangs, ethnic tension, and violent riots. Irish immigrants, like Billy's family, were often trapped in neighborhoods marked by overcrowding and hostility. The so-called Piggery District? I have never heard that before.
No?
No.
Have you watched Gangs of New York? Really? Oh my gosh.
He's about to kick me out again, folks.
Yeah, you haven't seen that movie?
I haven't. It's not out of not intention. I just haven't.
It is so good.
I just haven't yet.
Daniel Day-Lewis and I think Gene Hackman's in that.
The late Gene Hackman.
I believe Gene Hackman and Daniel Day-Lewis are like the opposing gang leaders. It all takes part in the 5 Points. Yeah, they fight each other. I mean, and the dumbass dude from like Step Brothers, the one that plays with Will Ferrell, that guy.
Oh, why can't I remember his name?
He's in that, and that other douchebag that I don't like, DiCaprio, he's in there.
You don't like Leo?
No, it is a lot of really great. It's a freaking awesome movie. Well worth the watch.
Well, I'm not avoiding it on purpose.
We're going to just start having movie nights for crying out loud. This is getting out of control.
He's going to hold me down Clockwork Orange style with my eyes pried open.
Yep.
The so-called Piggery District was notorious for its shanties and pig farms where hogs roamed freely through the muck-filled streets. In 1859, I'm going to do that every time. 1859, city leaders forcibly cleared these livestock pens, a small but symbolic attempt to civilize what reformers saw as chaotic, disease-ridden quarter. These were the surroundings of Billy's infancy, harsh, dirty, and dangerous. On November 23rd, 1859, Catherine McCarty, an Irish immigrant, gave birth to her son at what historians believe was 70 Allen Street. His father disappeared, leaving William Antrim, Catherine's companion, to fill the role of a surrogate father while running a fruit stand. These humble beginnings are far removed from the myths of the frontier outlaw. For the first years of his life, Billy's world wasn't the desert or open range. It was the crowded, chaotic streets of Manhattan's Irish Quarter. For working-class immigrants, life meant scraping by. Tenements were overcrowded, sanitation nearly non-existent, and outbreaks of disease common. Reformers were just beginning to argue against cellar dwellings, which were often dark, damp, and unfit for human habitation. Public health measures lagged far behind population growth, and the McCarthys would have experienced firsthand the struggles of survival in an unforgiving city. By 1859, New York's population was nearing 800,000, a staggering figure for the time, though dwarfed by today's 8.2 million residents, and more than 19 million in the metro area. Crime was rampant. In 1860, the city recorded nearly 66,000 arrests and 57 homicides, with gang wars and public drunkenness common. The NYPD, only 14 years old, was struggling with corruption and overwhelmed by the chaos. In contrast, by 2025, New York averages fewer than one murder per day, with major felonies at historic lows compared to the 1980s and 1990s. Crime reporting and policing are professionalized, but in Billy's day, violence was woven into the very fabric of the city. When we picture Billy the Kid, we imagine the dusty frontier, gunfights, the outlaw legend, but his story begins in a New York City teeming with immigrants, gangs, and social upheaval, a city where survival was itself a daily fight. The same forces that shaped the city's Irish immigrant communities also shaped the boy who would one day become the most famous outlaw of the American West.
Thank you, Angela.
You're welcome.
And, full disclosure here, these are going to be interesting and fun to do, but, I'm doing the best I can with getting the information. But, it's like William Antrim. She might have met him in New York, but she might have met him in Indianapolis, and she might have met him in Wichita, and we don't really know. And there's like 575 William Antrims, and trying to figure out which one fits. And
he's just a fruit stand guy who's just hanging around.
That's just one of the stories. There are others, and we'll be talking about like Billy and his brother Joseph, and we think that Joseph was older than Billy, but he might have been younger. I mean, when you're dealing with this old of history and the records were absolute shit back then, it's really hard there's a lot of this stuff we just don't accurately know.
Somebody's grandma wrote all this down and it's just in a cellar somewhere.
Probably. There was just recently a picture found that we think is Billy the Kid, and it would only be the second picture of him.
Wow.
And so it hasn't fully been confirmed to me, never fully been confirmed, but it is thought to be another picture of Billy the Kid. So it's pretty cool. So beginning this, like I said in the beginning, I'll kind of set the scene a little bit, but this is going to be kind of like a courtroom. So the charge: a boy abandoned too soon who grew into an outlaw the frontier could never forget. Before he was Billy the Kid, before the jailbreaks and the gunfights, he was Henry McCarty, a bright, polite Irish kid born into the slums of New York City in 1859. His exact birthday? Lost to history. Some say September, others November. A baptismal record from St. Peter's Catholic Church dated late September is the closest thing that we have to certainty. But what matters isn't the date, it's the setting. A child born into a city that didn't care if he lived or starved. The McCartys lived in the tenements, dark, overcrowded, reeking with sewage, the kind of housing where every cough carried down the hallway. Catherine, his mother, scraped by through menial jobs, taking what work an Irish immigrant widow could get. Violence was common, alcohol cheaper than bread, and children learned early to fight or disappear. For Henry and his younger brother Joseph, possibly older, childhood meant running errands, dodging older gangs of boys, and watching neighbors waste away from disease or drink. As for Henry's father, that's a ghost story. Patrick McCarty is sometimes named, but records don't agree. Some say he died in New York, others place him in Indiana, still others believe he simply walked out. Another Irish immigrant crushed by poverty and prone to vanishing. For Henry, the result was the same: a boy left behind. He lost his father twice, once to death and once to indifference.
After Billy the Kid's birth in New York, his family spent time in Indiana, a place far different from the chaotic Lower East Side. In the late 1850s and early 1860s, Indianapolis was a modest Midwestern capital, steadily growing but still closer to a frontier town than a bustling metropolis. For a boy who would one day be remembered as an outlaw, these years were spent in a quieter setting, shaped by farmland, churches, and small-town rhythms. By 1860, Indianapolis counted just 18,611 residents, with Marion County at around 39,855. The numbers nearly doubled within a decade, showing how rapidly the city was drawing in people, trade, and opportunity. Compare that to today, when Indianapolis, let's emphasize all the syllables, when Indianapolis is home to nearly 877,000 people, and the metro area nears 2 million. No, thank you.
Yeah.
In Billy's childhood, though, the capital was still small enough that neighbors knew one another and major events could ripple through the entire community. Indianapolis was still defining itself. Streets were tree-lined, the town core was developing, and farms or wooded hills sat just beyond city limits. Civic life revolved around churches, schools, and small businesses. As the state capital, Indianapolis was beginning to attract political and economic attention. but it lacked the industrial chaos of New York. Life was steadier, slower, and more local, yet change was clearly underway as railroads and commerce pushed the city forward. Crime in 1860s in Indianapolis was nothing like the gang wars of 5 Points or the violent unrest of the larger cities. Population density was lower, and poverty, while present, didn't concentrate into explosive slums. Most arrests involved petty theft, drunkenness, or neighborhood disputes. Major crimes like homicide were rare enough to be individually recorded in local papers and courthouse ledgers. The city's law enforcement structure was basic, relying more on local justice than large organized policing. Fast forward to today, and Indianapolis is a very different story. In 2024, the city logged 209 homicides, marking the 5th year above 200. By the first half of 2025, though, numbers had dropped nearly 30%, with 57 homicides from January to June. Property crime and assaults remain pressing issues, but the scale of urban crime today is dramatically larger, reflecting the city's massive growth and modern challenges. In Billy's childhood, Indianapolis was a close-knit community. Churches anchored social life. Small businesses sustained families, and most people still lived within walking distance of farmland. Violence was rare, and when it happened, it became local lore. Compare that to modern Indianapolis, a sprawling metropolitan hub, diverse and complex, where law enforcement is professionalized, crime tracking is systematic, and the challenges of poverty, drugs, and inequality echo across neighborhoods. Billy the Kid's Indiana years placed him in a very different environment than his birthplace in New York. Here, instead of riots and gang warfare, he would have seen fields, churches, and quiet streets. Yet Indianapolis was also a city on the rise, growing fast, changing quickly, and setting the stage for the restless movement westward that would eventually shape his destiny.
Billy the Kid's family life in Indiana was shaped by his mother, Catherine McCarty's determination and entrepreneurial spirit, which stood out as remarkable for a woman of the period. Catherine managed a laundry business and acquired significant real estate, an uncommon accomplishment for a woman in the 1860s, which provided her sons a stable, if modest, home environment. And you know, it's really interesting because I've been reading about Billy the Kid for pretty much my whole life. I've probably read at least 5 or 6 books that said that she was a prostitute and that he was basically a homeless orphan all of his life.
That's what I have memories of.
Yeah, not at all. She was actually a pretty freaking outstanding woman, especially
good on her.
Period of time. So in Indianapolis, Catherine was known for running a hand laundry, often mentioned in local histories and archives. She also bought and owned land, sometimes purchasing property adjacent to her partner, William Antrim's holdings, and later sold multiple lots and a sizable farm before the family's move west. Her ability to independently own land and operate a business set her apart and provided rare economic security for her 2 sons, Billy or Henry, and Joseph, who went by Josie.
Do we know how we got Billy?
We will.
Okay, good. I need to know.
Within Marion County and later Wichita, those who visited Catherine's household described a welcoming environment, praising her hospitality and the upbringing of her boys. She was noted as the only woman to sign the 1870 petition to incorporate the city of Wichita, a sign of her respected status and involvement in civic life. Though she faced the dual burdens of widowhood and single motherhood, her resourcefulness gained her the admiration of many in the community. Now, Billy, as a boy in Indiana, he was known then as Henry, and he lived with his widowed mother and his brother. So while myth sometimes paints Billy as wild from an early age, historical evidence indicates that he was viewed by teachers, neighbors, and classmates as a polite and very bright child. He likely attended local school, and later accounts note his precociousness, and his ability to read well. Traits admired by his acquaintances in youth and confirmed later by biographers. Although records of specific interactions with teachers and classmates are sparse, Billy was remembered in his childhood as mischievous but not malicious, embodying the gamin and the plucky street kid, more charming than threatening. Catherine was respected as a single mother who made her household a warm gathering place, and Billy was described as possessing a frank, open countenance and was remembered as an intelligent social child, not as an outcast or a troublemaker. Local records suggest the McCarty family was viewed sympathetically and positively, especially considering their Irish immigrant status and Catherine's unique achievements. So, in summary, life for Billy the Kid's family in Indiana was characterized by Catherine's rare independence in land and business and supportive home environments and a reputation for respectability, with young Billy looked upon as a capable and likable kid within his community and his school. And so Catherine just started this business in town, and it was a hand laundry. She worked her ass off. These guys would bring their filthy ass clothes, and this is the day where it was wash basins and washboards.
Yep.
And she would work her ass off all day long scrubbing these clothes. And then they said that during the summer, she had clotheslines all over where she would hang the clothes to dry, but in the wintertime, she'd have to drag them all the way up to the attic where she had clotheslines strung all over in the attic so that she could hang them all up there and dry. And then William Antrim bought a piece of ground outside of town, but it wasn't very long before Catherine bought the neighboring property. And then she bought several neighboring properties. She was just kind of building her land.
Her empire.
William Antrim was doing the same thing. So the couple had bought significant land holdings.
That's pretty cool.
Before they left Indianapolis. And so Catherine refused to let the city bury her children. And in 1865, she packed up Henry and Josie and pushed west. And it could
Josie?
Huh?
And Josie?
That's what he went by. It was
really?
Josie, but he went by Josie. Yeah. So
got it.
Henry and Josie. And it was said that it might have been that the city was impacting her kids. She didn't want them to get in trouble and stuff. But this was also when she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. And so working in the laundry, in the humidity and stuff in the laundry would have aggravated that. And so it's likely that her doctors told her, which was very common.
Go somewhere dry.
Yeah, go to Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. I mean, Colorado became a haven.
Yes, it did.
For what they called lungers back then. She was a lunger. And so they probably told her, you need to go west and maybe you'll live a bit longer. So that is the most likely reason that they decided to leave. And so they left Indianapolis and then were in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas by 1870. And each stop was a gamble. Better climate, cheaper land, steadier work. For a time, they even went and lived in Denver. And so it's not, we can't say absolutely certain that they lived in Denver, but one of the guys that we're going to be talking about who actually was in the Lincoln County War with Billy, then he didn't die and he lived on and he died in like the 30s or something like that, would go on to say that Billy told him stories about living in Denver for a short period of time. So very likely they had a short stay in Denver. And like many Irish families, they followed faint trails of opportunity, often where other immigrants had already settled. And so along the way, Catherine, it's somewhere along here, she met William Henry Harrison Antrim. And this was definitely before Indianapolis or in Indianapolis, one of the two, because they were most certainly a couple in Indianapolis. And he was no knight in shining armor, but he provided companionship, if not much stability. By 1873, the family had reached Santa Fe. Catherine, already coughing from tuberculosis, married Antrim at the First Presbyterian Church. Henry and Josie were there watching as their mother tied her fate to a man who would later abandon them. And then from there, they headed to Silver City, a raw mining town perched on the edge of the desert. Forget any image of safety. Silver City was a frontier crossroads of miners, drifters, gamblers, and saloons. And the McCartys, or now the Antrums, lived in a modest cabin on Main Street. Their neighbors more often brawlers and drinkers than stable families. So, like we said, Billy the Kid was born Henry McCarty, and he spent his formative teenage years in Silver City, New Mexico, a period crucial to his transformation from that quiet student and into an infamous outlaw. Silver City in the early 1870s was a rugged, fast-growing mining town, still surrounded by wilderness and marked by lawlessness and opportunity. Billy, his mother Catherine, and stepfather William Antrim arrived in Silver City in 1873, seeking a climate to ease Catherine's tuberculosis. Silver City was a lively community centered around the silver mining boom, full of saloons, mercantiles, basic churches, and cabins. Catherine quickly established herself, renting and baking to support her sons and running a laundry for extra income. Their home was a modest log cabin, and daily life involved plenty of work for both Billy and his younger or older brother, Joseph.
So she went to a better climate, but still running laundry.
Yeah, but it's going to be a lot different in New Mexico than it was.
I mean, true, but still. Okay.
I mean, yeah, she did what she had to do.
I mean,
make money for her.
You do what you know.
So Billy and Joseph attended local schools, a point that marks Billy as more settled and literate than legend would suggest.
Right.
Teachers described him as polite, helpful, and a competent student who enjoyed singing and reading.
Really?
Yeah. He was also remembered as, quote, no more trouble than any of the other boys. He was willing to do odd jobs and generally trustworthy. Notably, a hotel manager claimed that Billy was the only kid who never stole from him.
Okay.
Socially, Billy integrated with other children, and this part is really key. He learned Spanish fluently during this period of time, which would help him tremendously later in life. And he adopted the customs of the local Mexican-American population, including their dance and their music. And it's said that he absolutely loved the culture. He loved the way they dressed. He loved their language. He loved the way they danced and their music. He loved everything about them.
More of the stories that I hear about him or know about him, he's more that than Irish.
Very much so.
So when you were starting to say Irish, I was like, what?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Just the process and keep going.
Yep. So, but unfortunately for Billy, and I mean, really for history, because we would not know Billy at all. We probably wouldn't know a thing about him if it wasn't for this. And that is that in 1874, Catherine succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving Billy, age 14 at the time, and his brother Joseph, either older or younger, orphaned. William Antrim, never a committed father, sold the family home and placed the boys in foster care before leaving for Arizona. And I mean, in actuality, he was in Arizona, Mike.
Yeah.
And then he just never came back.
He was just like, eh. Yeah.
So Billy was forced into menial jobs, washing dishes, waiting tables, and living in boarding houses. And this period marked the start of his more precarious existence. So descriptions from Silver City portray Billy as slender, about 5'8", 120 to 140 pounds, with clear blue eyes, smooth cheeks, somewhat prominent front teeth, and large wrists that help him escape handcuffs many times. He was regularly seen in a sugar loaf sombrero with a decorative band, a distinct fashion among local youth. Billy was known for his lively personality, enjoyment of dance and song, and humor, but his mother's death, loss, and hardship definitely hardened him for the struggles ahead. And are you familiar with the famous picture of Billy the Kid? He's kind of leaning on a gun. He has a top hat on, and
yeah, it sounds.
So if you ever look at that picture, he looks really homely. Mm-hmm. He looks ugly, actually.
Yeah.
In truth, everybody described him as like a really handsome guy. So it's just a shitty picture, but it's interesting because it's a tintype, and so it was tintypes could be viewed either from the backside or the front side. Well, for years it was showing backwards, so everybody thought he was left-handed as the picture was backwards. And so when you turn the tintype around the right way, he's actually right-handed. But there's all kinds of stuff that claim that he was left-handed. He wasn't left-handed, but that's where that comes from.
That's
so
very interesting.
And obviously it's a kind of a poor picture, because it's an old tintype. But that's the only thing that we have is.
And if everybody was looking at it backwards the whole time, of course it'd be ugly.
Right. Yeah. So, but even the picture turned around, he looks pretty homely, but that is not the descriptions that we have. So he was actually described as a really handsome guy that the girls just kind of swooned over. So.
Swoon. There's a word.
Yeah. So Silver City's crime environment was chaotic with frequent minor thefts, assault, and drunken brawls. Law enforcement was minimal and often based on personal relationships with the townspeople. Billy's first notorious acts were petty theft and his daring jailbreak, and they were seen as youthful rebellion rather than hardened criminality in the tight-knit community. So Billy left Silver City soon after his jailbreak, finding little support and increasingly turning to outlaw ways. For the rest of his life, Silver City remained one of the few places where Billy was seen not just as an outlaw, but as a likable, intelligent, and sympathetic youth. So the verdict of time? From that point on, Silver City was behind him. He left on foot, heading into the desert, and by the spring of 1876, he would surface in Arizona territory, calling himself Kid Antrim. This was the turning. The polite child, remembered by his school teachers, was gone. What remained was a boy without parents, without a home, without protection, a boy shaped by tenement slums, desert winds, and betrayals too heavy for his age. And it's in that crucible that the outlaw was forged. Henry McCarty faded, and Billy the Kid stepped into the light. Pistol in hand, smile on his face, and his name etched forever into the gallows record of the American frontier. Talking about that side of Billy the Kid a little bit, in the fall of 1875, Henry McCarty was still more child than criminal. But hunger is, just to kind of set the scene, this is right after Antrim, his stepdad, just bailed on these two kids.
Yeah.
And you're leaving 14-year-olds in Silver City, New Mexico in the 1870s.
Good luck.
Yeah. It wasn't like we had welfare that could come and step in and help them out, So they were put into an impossible situation. And, like I said, hunger doesn't care about age. It doesn't give a shit about anything other than I'm hungry and I want to eat. And so on September the 16th, the first anniversary of his mother's death, Henry was arrested for stealing food. It was survival. It wasn't greed. Sheriff Harvey Whitehill locked him up, but the offense barely registered in the town where kids stole daily. And the real turning point came then 10 days after that, when Billy was egged on by prankster George Schaefer. And so Henry and a friend broke into a Chinese laundry, and they took clothes and 2 pistols. Not much loot, but in the West, stealing firearms was no joke.
Still is.
Still. And so Henry was tossed into the Silver City jail. But it's interesting because he was so young, they didn't actually put him in a cell. They just kind of let him roam out in the corridor outside the cells. And
like a cell daycare situation, just,
Yeah, essentially, like if you think of the movie Green Mile.
Yeah.
He's like, we usually have a few lights burning out in the corridor. Well, Billy ran around out in the corridor. That's where he was running around at.
Okay.
And so finally he just decided that he wasn't going to wait around anymore. So the kid, though no one called him that yet, he just climbed up the jail's chimney, wriggled into the night, and vanished into the desert. And so the Silver City Herald carried the story, his first appearance in print, a local legend in the making, the boy who'd slipped the bars like smoke. Henry fled west to Chloride Flats and then farther still, and Silver City never saw him again. So by the spring of 1876, Henry turned up in Arizona. He was small, still youthful, still boyish, and the nickname came quickly. Like I said before, Kid Antrim. He found work near Camp Grant, wrangling livestock, drifting between ranches, gambling when he could, but Arizona already was pulling him toward crime. And he fell in with John R. Mackey, who is a former cavalryman turned horse thief. And together, they ran horses off soldiers, gambling their freedom for a quick profit. And some stories claim that Henry even clashed with Apaches during this time. An ambush in the Guadalupe Mountains where he and Tom O'Keefe fought to save their lives is the only confirmed instance of Billy the Kid in combat with Native Americans. But it was a brush with death that no doubt hardened his reputation even more, and trouble wasn't far behind. So on March 25th, 1877, Henry and Mackey were arrested for stealing cavalry horses. And shackled under the name Kid Antrim, Henry was locked at Camp Grant. But once again, he slipped the noose. While guards were distracted at a local dance, Henry broke free and disappeared. Another escape, another headline written in the dust. So Billy the Kid's first recorded killing of Frank Windy Cahill was a defining moment that irrevocably set him on a path to being an outlaw legend. And the incident took place on August the 17th, 1877 at George Atkins Saloon in Bonita, Camp Grant in Arizona Territory. It was deeply shaped by the tense social dynamics of the wild frontier. So Billy the Kid, and as we've said over and over again, it gets confusing because the freaking name changes.
It does, yeah.
At this time, he's still going by Henry McCarty, and he was working as a teamster at Camp Grant Army Post. And he was slender. He was an affable teen. At this point, he's described as being 5'8" and about 135 pounds. So pretty slight guy. And he was well liked at the camp for his wit and his sociability. In sharp contrast, his antagonist, Frank P. Windy Cahill, was a large, muscular, and ill-tempered Irish immigrant who is said to have stood about 6'2" and weighed 225 pounds. And he was notorious for bullying Billy both verbally and physically. And Cahill often belittled Billy, calling him a pimp, which frustrated and embarrassed the younger man in front of all of the other guys, And so on the night of August the 17th, 1877, Billy and Cahill got into yet another heated dispute during or shortly after a poker game at the saloon. Insults were traded. Billy called Cahill a son of a bitch. Cahill retaliated by picking Billy up and slamming him to the ground and then jumping on top of him and beating him about the face. And witnesses later said that Cahill was attempting to, quote, teach the kid a lesson using his size and strength to humiliate him physically. So pinned and being brutally assaulted, Billy managed in desperation to wriggle his hand to his revolver, and he fired a single shot, hitting Cahill in the stomach. He then squirmed free and fled the scene. Cahill died on the following day from the wound, and witnesses attested that Billy acted in self-defense. One recounted, quote, he had no choice. He had to use his equalizer. Remarkably, as Cahill lay dying, he reportedly stated that he was responsible for the fight. And so, though the law might have recognized the context as self-defense, Western frontier justice was swift and unforgiving. Murder, justified or not, was a hanging offense, and Billy didn't wait for the authorities. He fled Camp Grant immediately becoming a fugitive. So officially, local Justice Miles Wood considered the killing unjustifiable and issued a warrant for Billy's arrest under the name Kid Antrim. So by then, also known as William H. Bonney, and there is another name. So
Yeah.
Billy snuck back a few days later, but was caught and detained in the Camp Grant guardhouse. But before lawmen could arrive to transfer him, Billy escaped once again, and he crossed back into New Mexico territory, forever branded as an outlaw and a murderer. So Billy the Kid's first killing was both a tragic endpoint and a fateful beginning of his journey as an outlaw. I mean, it really is what made him an outlaw.
Right.
Unveiling themes of survival, lawlessness, and frontier retribution that pervaded his short but infamous life. And so I think looking at his story, it's very easy to say, well, first of all, we have no clue, but had he not killed Wendy Cahill, I could see it's very likely that he could have just gone on working and maybe never would have become an outlaw at all. I mean, he had stolen horses and stuff like that, but he was working a job during this period of time. He might have just gone straight, but this killing really changed his trajectory, but only the first time, because there's another one that's going to change it for good. But with Cahill dead and Arizona closing in, Henry fled back to New Mexico, but he did not come back as Henry McCarty. He came back as William H. Bonney. So why that name? The truth has been debated ever since. Some say that he took William from his stepfather, William Antrim, and Bonney from his mother's maiden name. Others insist that Bonney may have been his father's true surname, or that he borrowed it from another family tie. There are even accounts suggesting that Catherine once married a man named William Bonney, but the records are unclear. What is clear is that by the fall of 1877, Henry understood something, and that was his old name was dangerous. McCarty was tied to arrests, escapes, and a killing in Arizona, so Kid Antrim was too easy to trace. And so to survive and to confuse the law and maybe to start again, he needed reinvention. And so he became William H. Bonney. Weird. It was a practical step. Outlaws and gamblers use aliases like currency, but it was also symbolic because with the name change came a new chapter. Drifting into the orbit of John Tunstall, a man who gave him not just a job, but dignity. And for a boy abandoned so often, that mattered. So Bonney's new name carried weight. It was the severing of ties with the boy who once ran errands for neighbors and wrote little stories in Silver City. And it was the mark of an outlaw stepping into history's stage. So by late 1877, Bonney was riding with Jesse Evans' gang called the Boys, and he was stealing cattle, running with rustlers, and moving between Mesilla and Seven Rivers country. For a brief time, he even crossed paths with the cattle baron John Chisholm, a giant in the feud already smoldering against Murphy and Dolan's house. Bonney's Spanish gave him reach that others did not have. He could talk to vaqueros, ranch hands, and Mexican settlers, earning their trust. He wasn't just another drifter. He was a bridge between cultures, a bridge that would matter when the shooting war came. The fateful moment came when Billy was caught stealing horses from John Henry Tunstall's ranch. Hauled off and jailed, he might have expected what always followed: charges, time behind bars, and maybe a hanging down the line, but this time was different. Tunstall himself came to the jail, and he was young himself, only 24, but he carried himself with the polish of his English upbringing. Where others saw a thief, he saw something else. Billy was polite, he was literate, he was sharp-witted, respectful even when in chains. He didn't spit curses at authority. He conversed with it. Tunstall was struck enough to make a decision that changed the boy's life. He offered him work, real work, a job as a cowboy and a gunman. So instead of charges, Tunstall gave Billy something that no one else ever had, and that was a chance. He provided him with a horse, a saddle, and a Winchester 73 rifle. Gifts rare enough on the frontier, but absolutely astounding for a former horse thief. And more than tools, they were symbols of trust. Billy accepted without hesitation, and for the first time since his mother's death, he wasn't just drifting. He felt like he belonged. Tunstall's generosity forged a bond that would become unbreakable. Billy came to see him as a father figure, the first man, he later claimed, who treated him, quote, like I was decent and white, end quote. Tunstall saw something in Billy, too. He once said, quote, that's the finest lad I ever met. He's a revelation to me every day and would do anything to please me. I'm going to make a man out of that boy yet, end quote. So on the ranch, Billy worked tirelessly. He rode, he tended cattle, he guarded property against the Murphy Dolan's rustlers, and quickly earned the praise of Tunstall and his foreman, Dick Brewer. Around campfires, Tunstall told stories of England, of trade and ranching, of how to manage land with vision rather than with fear. For Billy, it was like hearing from a world that he'd never known and never would have if it wasn't for Tunstall. And in Brewer, Billy found not just a boss, but a big brother. With them, he wasn't just a drifter or a thief. He was part of a family. So this period marked more than just steady work. It was the moment that Henry McCarty, alias Kid Antrim, fully embraced the name William H. Bonney. The name was a shield, a new identity to match the new life that Tunstall had offered. And whether Billy came from family ties, his mother's maiden name, or his stepfather's first name, or was simply a convenient invention, it didn't matter anymore because it was his name now, and it tied him to this new chapter. The practical reason was survival. Fugitives lived and died by aliases, but for Billy, the timing mattered. He took Bonney as he took Tunstall's hand, as a new beginning. So the verdict of time? In the jailhouse meeting, two lives crossed. A young English rancher with vision and wealth, and a runaway boy with nothing but a quick smile, a faster draw, and a hunger for dignity. Tunstall gave Billy something no one else had: respect. A horse, a saddle, a rifle, and above all, trust. Billy gave back what he always gave, fiercely and without hesitation: loyalty. And that loyalty would turn to vengeance, because when Tunstall was murdered in February of 1878, it wasn't just the killing of a rancher. For Billy, it was the execution of the only man who ever saw the boy inside the outlaw. And from that day forward, the Lincoln County War was no longer business or politics or monopoly. For Billy, it was personal. John Henry Tunstall was born on March 6, 1853 in Hackney, London. His family prospered through international trade and land speculation, wealthy enough for comfort, but not aristocracy. John grew up amid the genteel order of Belsize Park, well-schooled, curious, and restless. As a teenager, he followed his father to British Columbia, where he learned the rhythms of trade and property management. These lessons, balancing books, judging land, calculating risk, would later guide his ventures in the American Southwest. Tunstall wanted more than inherited comfort. He left England, drifting first to Canada and then to California. By 1876, he was drawn to New Mexico, where land was cheap, opportunity vast, and politics feral. In Santa Fe, he met Alexander McSween, who was a Canadian-born lawyer estranged from his former employers, Murphy and Dolan. The two men, one with capital, with the other with legal expertise, found common cause. Both despised monopoly. Both hungered for a fairer system in Lincoln. With McSween at his side and financial backing from cattle king John Chisholm, Tunstall built a rival empire, a store, a bank, a ranch. His model was simple: fairer credit, lower prices, and honest dealings. And in the next episode, we'll be talking about the competition. But just quickly, just so everybody understands, the Murphy-Dolan cabal was known as the House.
Okay.
And they were Irish and they were Catholic. And that becomes important because not only does this become a war between two rival companies, it was also Catholics against the Protestants, the same as the Irish war that raged for years and years and years.
Okay.
So there's a lot going on here, but the Murphy-Dolan faction was known as the House, and they'd basically been here for quite some time. They controlled all of the stores, the banking, and there was a group of politicians known as the Santa Fe Ring, which were basically a bunch of crooked bastards that just... And so the Santa Fe Ring was in bed with the Murphy-Dolan faction, who also owned the sheriffs and the judges. And then John Chisholm, who I doubt you've ever seen that movie. It's an old John Wayne movie, Chisholm. Really good one. But that's the guy that we're talking about. Chisholm was actually more on the side of the Tunstall-McSween faction. And so as we kind of go through this, we're not going to get into the Murphy-Dolan side tonight. We'd be here all night. We're going to be here for a while anyway, but we would definitely be here all night. But just so to kind of set the ground, so, we understand all kind of at least what's going on. We have a monopoly currently set up known as the House, and Tunstall and McSween are basically trying to set up the competition to that. And their idea was, they were going to offer credit the same as the House did, but they were going to offer it on fairer terms, lower interest, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's also definitely going to cut into the House's business. So that's the driving force behind what's going to become the Lincoln County War.
Okay.
So for small ranchers and vaqueros suffocated by Murphy and Dolan's terms, Tunstall was salvation. For the House, he was an existential threat. His cultural manner and Protestant ties deepened ethnic rivalries, Irish Catholic monopoly versus Anglo-Protestant upstart, and Tunstall hired and armed loyal cowboys for protection, and among them was a wiry Spanish-speaking youth known then as William H. Bonney, and history would remember him as Billy the Kid. So we'll get into a lot of the stuff that happened during that led up to all of this. So I'm just kind of laying the groundwork right now. But I got to mention that on February the 18th, 1878, John Tunstall rode out with several hands. And the story is as broad as everything else. So, some people say he went out to check his livestock. Others say that he was out riding with the boys. Still, there's the Young Guns story, which they didn't just make up. And it was that they were off at a celebration. In the movie, it was New Year's, but they were off at a celebration and were riding home. My research makes me believe that the truth of the matter was there was a lot of legal wrangling going on because of an insurance dispute that McSween was a part of. John Tunstall had no part of it whatsoever. And we'll get much deeper into it and I'll explain it all. But essentially is what happened is McSween had taken some money and he was refusing to turn it over to the House. And they were demanding it. It was an insurance settlement. And the people who were the heirs of the person that died were in Germany. And he was saying, no, this belongs to them in Germany. And the House was saying, no, it needs to come to settle our accounts. He wouldn't give it to them. So they go to a judge, and a judge basically gives them permission to take John Tunstall's property to pay the debt of McSween. It's a totally convoluted, insane legal maneuver that can only happen when the judge is in your pocket.
Yeah.
But I tell that because what I think the real story is is Tunstall believed that all of this could be handled legally and in the court system. And so when he got the demand to bring horses to turn over to the house to settle this debt, him and the cowboys were actually driving those horses to turn them in when this occurred.
Okay.
And so what this is Sheriff Brady authorized a posse. Included in that posse was Jesse Evans, who ran the gang The Boys, who Billy the Kid rode with and stole cattle with for a while. So he basically deputized criminals, and Tom Hill was another one of them, and sent these criminals out to act as a posse and commandeer resources from John Tunstall. And so they were told that they could go seize Tunstall's horses, and what happened is they ambushed him on the open range.
Right.
And John Henry Tunstall was shot in the head at close range. His body was left sprawled in the dust, spectacles still in his pocket, and he was just 24 years old. And so the killing was absolutely no accident. It was an assassination orchestrated to crush opposition to the house once and for all. And instead, it lit a fuse. So when Tunstall's cowboys learned of his death, grief turned to fury, and they buried him with solemn vows. And then they formed the group called the Regulators. And that group was led by Dick Brewer, who was Charlie Sheen in Young Guns. And it was joined by Billy the Kid, who was his brother, Emilio Estevez. And their mission was not just justice by court, it was vengeance by the gun. So within weeks, Lincoln County was drenched in blood. The murder of Tunstall was the spark that turned lawsuits into warfare. So the verdict of time, John Henry Tunstall came to Lincoln as an entrepreneur, an idealist, and an outsider. He believed in fairness, in law, and in the promise that honest business could defeat monopoly. His murder proved otherwise. History remembers him as the symbol of principle undone by violence. His death shattered illusions of peace and transformed Billy the Kid from cowboy to avenger. Tunstall's name endures as the martyr whose blood baptized the Lincoln County War. So the verdict on John Henry Tunstall was sealed in blood, but every trial has two sides and every crusade has its counsels. If Tunstall was the heart of the challenge to the house, Alexander McSween was its voice and its architect. A lawyer by training, a man of faith and restless conviction, McSween transformed grief into litigation, loss into resilience. It was through his contracts, his petitions, his appeals to higher law that the struggle in Lincoln County found not only rifles in the street, but arguments in the courtroom. Where Tunstall's death lit the fire, McSween's pen and presence gave that fire direction. To understand the war that followed, we must call the next witness, the man who stood not with a gun in his hand, but with statutes, writs, and the stubborn belief that the law itself might yet restrain corruption. So Alexander Anderson McSween was born on June 15, 1837, in Canada, likely on Prince Edward Island or in Nova Scotia. He was of Scottish descent. He was said to have preached as a Presbyterian minister in his youth, though records blur fact and rumor. What is certain is that he did study law, at least briefly, in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1873, he married Susan Hummer in Atchison, Kansas, and together they settled first in Eureka, Kansas, before drifting westward. But by 1875, the McSweens arrived in Lincoln County, New Mexico, where Alexander accepted a position as attorney for the most powerful men in town, Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan. So at first, McSween was indispensable to the house. He managed contracts, claims, and disputes. But when Emil Fritz died in 1874, McSween was sent to collect his $10,000 life insurance policy. But when he returned, like I said, he refused to release the funds to Murphy and Dolan. Legally, he said the money belonged to Fritz's heirs in Germany, not to the house. It was a technicality to some, a betrayal to others. To Murphy and Dolan, it was outright theft. The feud escalated quickly. Murphy and Dolan accused McSween of embezzlement. With Sheriff Brady and the Santa Fe ring at their back, they secured writs to attach McSween's property and even assets belonging to his friend and future partner, like I said, John Tunstall. The message was clear. Resist the House and the law will destroy you. So in 1876, McSween found his answer when he partnered with John Tunstall, who was the young English rancher that we just got done talking about. McSween brought his legal mind. Tunstall brought money and respectability. Together with the backing from the cattle baron John Chisholm, they opened that rival store, bank, ranch, all the competing things. And their practices were fair, like I said. But as the feud deepened, McSween remained at the center. A lawyer turned faction leader. When Murphy and Dolan hired the Jesse Evans gang and Kinney's men and the Seven Rivers Warriors to raid and rustle, McSween and Tunstall armed their own cowboys for protection. These men included Billy the Kid, Dick Brewer, Frank and George Coe, Fred Waite, and others. They were deputized by a sympathetic justice of the peace, and they became known as the Regulators. So this is the convoluted mess that I alluded to in the beginning segment. Mm-hmm. You've got these judges deputizing these bunch of asshats who were the Jesse Evans gang and Kinney's men and all that kind of shit. They're deputies. And then you have a justice of the peace who's deputizing the other side. So essentially you have lawmen fighting lawmen for a little while here. And so when Tunstall was murdered, McSween's role shifted from counselor to commander, and he was shitty at it, by the way. He was terrible at this part of things. But he coordinated the legal maneuvers, but he also stood behind the Regulators as they exacted vengeance. And they would go on to ambush Sheriff Brady on April the 1st, 1878, and was widely believed to have been encouraged, if not outright ordered, by McSween himself, removing not just an enemy, but the man holding an arrest warrant in his name. So unfortunately, it's impossible, to tell this story in progression. So we've got to do a lot of bouncing back and forth stuff. So just because it would make no sense if I just started telling a bunch of names and didn't kind of connect them. And
people are like, who the hell is that?
Exactly. So The war raged through 1878, and each side trading raids, lawsuits, and killings. So by July, McSween was indicted for embezzlement and murder. He was pursued by Dolan's forces and trapped in his own house. And on July the 15th, 1878, Sheriff George Pepin's posse, stacked with Dolan allies and the Seven Rivers men, besieged the McSween home. For 5 days, bullets tore through adobe walls, and on the night of July the 19th, the attackers set the house on fire. As flames consumed the roof, McSween emerged wearing a white shirt that made him an easy target in the dark. Right. Gunfire erupted. McSween fell dead in his own yard alongside his law partner, Harvey Morris. His wife, Susan, was spared, and her survival a cruel mercy as she watched the end of her husband's cause. Yeah. So the verdict of time, Alexander McSween believed the law could outfight monopoly. In Lincoln County, it could not. His defiance turned him from Murphy's ally into his most dangerous enemy, from lawyer into outlaw, and from strategist into martyr. His death marked the end of the Lincoln County War. His widow, Susan, went on to build one of the largest cattle herds in New Mexico, outlasting pretty much all of the men who had killed her husband. But history remembers Alexander McSween as the lawyer who fought the House with paper and pen until bullets and fire silenced him. So when Alexander McSween fell in the flames of his own house, the war seemed over, but out of the ashes, his widow stepped forward. Susan McSween had lost her husband, her home, and nearly her life, yet she refused to vanish. In a world ruled by gunmen and monopolies, She carved out a future with nothing but her wits, her courage, and the land beneath her boots. So Susan Ellen Hummer was born December 30th, 1845 in Adams County, Pennsylvania. Her family were German Baptist, the Dunkards, whose faith emphasized simplicity and discipline. But Susan's own life was never simple. Her mother's death and father's remarriage left her restless, and she struck out on her own young, choosing independence over obedience. In 1873, she married Alexander McSween in Eureka, Kansas. 2 years later, they rode west to Lincoln County, New Mexico. And Susan wasn't content to remain in the background. She was her husband's confidant and partner, weighing in on business decisions and legal strategies. Their home in Lincoln became a gathering place for allies and later for the Regulators, the cowboy vigilantes who swore to avenge Tunstall's murder. Billy the Kid himself found shelter beneath Susan's roof. Her courage was tested in July 1878 during the 5-day battle when Dolan's men laid siege to the McSween home. After that, widowed and destitute, Susan faced harassment, slander, and the looming shadow of her enemies. Yet she refused to disappear. She sought justice for Alex, working with attorney Huston Chapman and federal investigator Frank Engel to expose corruption, including Colonel Dudley's role in the violence. When Chapman was murdered in Lincoln, likely at Dolan's behest, Susan pressed on, demanding accountability from a system rigged against her. Though the courts failed, Susan's defiance became legendary. With nothing left but the land, Susan turned to ranching. She inherited about 160 acres, including the Baca home, and evicted Dolan's allies who squatted on her property. Then she rebuilt. Through grit, shrewd management, and alliances with cattlemen, Susan grew her holdings into one of the largest herds in the territory. So by the 1880s, she was known as the Cattle Queen of New Mexico. She managed court battles, signed contracts in her own name, and stood toe-to-toe with the men who had once dismissed her as an appendage of her husband. In a world where women were rarely allowed to own power, Susan seized it and held it. Susan McSween lived long enough to see New Mexico achieve statehood. She outlasted Murphy, Dolan, Riley, Brady, and even Billy the Kid. She built an empire from ashes, turned loss into legacy, and carried her independence into old age. She died on July 3rd, 1931 in White Oaks, New Mexico.
January.
What did I say?
July.
I meant January. She died January 3rd, 1931 in White Oaks, New Mexico, nearly 86 years old, a survivor to the last. And
Strong woman.
to Young Guns 2, when the naked hooker is riding out of town on the horse and she says, "White Oaks, you can kiss my ass." So the verdict of time? Susan McSween's story is one of the most remarkable of the Old West. She entered history as the widow of a fallen lawyer, but carved her own place as a rancher, entrepreneur, and survivor. She faced violence, corruption, and betrayal, and answered with resilience, intelligence, and grit. History remembers her not as a victim of the Lincoln County War, but as the woman who walked out of its ashes and claimed the land as her own. Susan McSween may have carried the burden of grief, but she was not alone in her fight. Around her husband and John Tunstall had gathered a company of young cowboys and ranchers, men who long before the Gunsmoke had been hired hands, neighbors, or friends. They were not yet the Regulators of legend. At first, they were simply Tunstall's boys. drovers, horse breakers, and farmhands who kept his cattle moving and his ranch alive. But when Lincoln's courts bent under the weight of monopoly as Sheriff Brady turned law into a weapon, those same cowboys would be deputized under local authority, suddenly transformed from ranch hands into armed constables. This is where the line blurred most sharply. They were legal one day, outlawed the next. Their oaths, the court dissolved, but their loyalty to Tunstall and McSween remained. And so a ranch crew became a vigilante band, a name whispered with equal parts admiration and fear, the Regulators. It was within this group that men like Richard Brewer, Charlie Bowdre, the co-cousins, and a wiry youth named Billy Bonney stepped forward. Before the war, they were ordinary cowboys. Afterwards, they would be remembered as symbols of vengeance, justice, and banditry, depending on who told the story. The charge? From cowhands to vigilantes, the rise of the Regulators. So on February 18th, 1878, we know John Tunstall was gunned down. Tunstall's lawyer, McSween, and his foreman, Dick Brewer, rallied the dead man's cowboys and friends, and a local justice of the peace by the name of John B. Wilson deputized Brewer as a special constable. And so for the moment, they had legitimacy. Warrants were issued for Tunstall's killers. The posse included names that would echo across the West: Billy the Kid, John Middleton, Henry Brown, Fred Waite, Charlie Bowdre, George Coe, Frank Coe. They called themselves the Regulators. And at first, they were legal, a sworn posse. But when Governor Samuel Axtell revoked their authority under pressure from the House, they were stripped of their badges. And from that day, they were outlaws in the eyes of the territory. So the Regulators began with a clear mission: bring the men who murdered John Tunstall. They rode with warrants, and for a time they acted like deputies. But justice in Lincoln was already poisoned. Judges and sheriffs bent to Murphy and Dolan. When the Regulators tried to serve warrants on men like Jesse Evans, Tom Hill, William Morton, Frank Baker, they found the law itself standing in their way. Some of these men were captured. Others died, quote, resisting arrest. The Regulators' mandate shifted quickly from targeted arrests to open war. They became a band of brothers, bound by vengeance and survival. They rode against outlaws, sheriffs, and soldiers alike. On April 1st, 78 was the Brady ambush. In Lincoln's dusty street, the Regulators opened fire on Sheriff William Brady and his deputies. Brady was riddled with bullets. Deputy George Hindman was killed beside him, and Billy the Kid was seen stripping Brady's body of arrest warrants, legal paper reclaimed by illegal hands. And then there was the Blazers Mill gunfight, which was a confrontation with the tough mountain man Buckshot Roberts, who was played by Brian Keith in Young Guns, is turned bloody, and Dick Brewer, the Regulators' captain, was killed. Roberts was mortally wounded, but fighting to the last. He was one tough son of a bitch. Let me tell you what, this guy was a tough bastard. And then on April to July of 1878, there were all kinds of skirmishes, ambush, assassinations. Regulator bullets took down enemies like William Morton and Frank Baker, but every shot deepened the cycle of reprisal. And then was the 5-day battle. July in Lincoln. The Regulators holed up in the McSween house, firing from the windows, surrounded by Dolan's hired guns, and on the final night, the house was torched. Flames drove the Regulators into the open. Alexander McSween was cut down, and his men were scattered, with some of them dying in the yard. So by late 1878, the Regulators were broken. Some were dead, others fled. A few took amnesty when Governor Lew Wallace offered it. Billy the Kid, restless and loyal to no one but himself by then, drifted into other outlaw bands. The legend of the Regulators ended, but the blood that they spilled lingered in Lincoln County's dust. So the verdict of time? The Regulators began as deputies with warrants in their hands. They ended as outlaws with rifles to their shoulders. To their enemies, they were vigilantes, assassins. To their allies, They were the only justice that Lincoln County ever saw. Their legacy is not order, but memory, a reminder that when the law collapses, men will make their own. So among the rough fraternity of cowboys and ranch hands, there had to be someone to steady the reins. The Regulators were young, restless, and already burning with anger over Tunstall's murder. But without order, fury alone would scatter them like dust on the plains. That order came in the form of Richard Dick Brewer. Older than most, sober-minded, and already trusted as Tunstall's foreman, Brewer was the natural choice to lead. He knew cattle, he knew the land, and he knew men. Where others reached first for the gun, Brewer reached for a plan. Before the first warrant was served or the first ambush laid, it was Brewer who gave the Regulators shape. A leader who carried not just Tunstall's brand, but his cause. So the charge? Leadership forged in loyalty. Dick Brewer, the first captain of the Regulators. So Richard Dick Brewer was born on February the 19th, 1850 in St. Albans, Vermont. His family soon moved west, settling in Boaz, Wisconsin. By his early teens, Brewer had struck out further, drifting through Missouri before finding his way to New Mexico territory. He bought land, tried his hand at farming, and lived quietly at first. But like so many settlers, he was drawn into ranching and into the orbit of men who would decide his fate. By the early 1870s, he was working under Lawrence Murphy. Dissatisfied with the man's methods, Brewer left, later joining John Tunstall as foreman. That decision changed his life. With Tunstall, Brewer found his footing. He was steady, diligent, and honest, the kind of man who could be trusted to run a ranch, handle men, and keep cattle moving. Tunstall relied on him for nearly everything. Brewer became the ranch's enforcer as well as its manager, chasing rustlers and riding with fellow cowboys like Doc Scurlock, Kiefer Sutherland and Charlie Bowdre, who was played by, who is that guy that's on My Best Friend's Wedding with, what's her name? And he's also...
He's a McDermott, isn't he?
Yeah.
No,
he's also Holly Hunter's partner in Copycat.
I always thought he was a McDermott.
Maybe he is. I don't know the name. Anyway, he's the one that plays Charlie Bowdre.
Yeah, well, I got to find out now.
So Dick's quiet authority earned respect. And when Billy the Kid appeared on the scene, Brewer saw him with potential. Reckless, yeah, but loyal when given reason. So Tunstall's growing mercantile and ranching empire had made enemies in Murphy and Dolan. Brewer by then was already standing in the crossfire. So we talked about, the February 18th shooting of John Tunstall. We talked about John B. Wilson deputizing the group. And we talked about this group of guys. We gave some of the names known as the Regulators. So Brewer led with a cool head, and he sought justice, not carnage. Though the line blurred quickly, he pursued William Morton and Frank Baker, two suspects in Tunstall's murder. They captured them, and they tried to deliver them to Lincoln, but somewhere along the trail, Morton and Baker were executed in custody. Whether by order or by mutiny, their deaths stained the Regulators' badge with blood. Did you find it?
What was the guy's name? The character, not the...
In Young Guns?
Steve?
It was Dirty Steve. I was wrong. It was Dirty Steve.
Dermot Mulrooney. That's why.
Okay.
Yes.
And so who played then Charlie? Because, yeah, you're right. He played Dirty Steve.
Casey Masco?
All right. I don't know who that is, but
I don't either.
Played the part really good. He was really good at it. So, and we'll get into all of this stuff in more detail as we move through this story. But on April the 4th, 1878, Dick Brewer led his Regulators to Blazer's Mill, and their target was Andrew Buckshot Roberts, who was believed to be aligned with Tunstall's killers.
Who was played by Brian Keith, just because I happened to be looking at it.
That one I knew. to think about it for a minute, but freaking Bryce.
You're looking at that moment.
Was such a great actor, and he played that part really well, although he had a very short role in the movie. But the fight was sudden and chaotic. Roberts, wounded and cornered, fought like a cornered bear, and he mortally shot Dick Brewer as the young captain tried to maneuver his men. Brewer fell and was the first Regulator captain to die, his blood soaking into the dirt of Blazer's Mill. He was only 28 years old. His body was laid to rest in Mescalero near the battlefield where he fell. And, I just got to say, it's so freaking interesting because in the other shows that we do, I'm always talking about like these young kids and how young they were. And they're just a bunch
they
of
weren't young
kids and all this.
Yeah.
But when you go this far back,
they weren't young.
15 was a grown-ass man,
Yeah.
and he was doing grown-ass shit,
Yeah.
So, I mean, Billy the Kid, he will go on to die at 21 famously. John,
spoiler alert, goodness sake.
if you don't know that part, then I mean, yeah, you can't really spoil a freaking story that's 150 years old. But John Tunstall was 24 at the time,
Yeah.
and he was like, this was essentially a very young.
I know. I'm looking at my kid going, "You're not much older than this dude."
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, my son is currently older than John Tunstall was, and he's not very damn much younger than Dick Brewer. So it's just crazy. But the verdict of time for Dick Brewer. Dick Brewer was no outlaw king, no gambler with death. He was a working man, a foreman, a rancher who believed that law could stand against corruption. And for a brief flickering moment, he carried a badge. Then, like so many in Lincoln, he carried a gun. His death left the Regulators rudderless. Into that vacuum stepped Billy the Kid, less cautious, less bound by conscience, more willing to fight until the end. Brewer's legacy is quieter than Billy's, but no less telling. He was proof that even good men, when pressed by corruption and betrayal, can be driven into bloodshed. But even the steadiest captain needs men that he can trust at his side. And Dick Brewer may have carried the burden of command, yet the Regulators drew their strength from a cycle of loyal fighters who shared Tunstall's cause long before the killing started. One of those men was Charlie Bowdre, a rancher by trade, a cheesemaker by experiment, and a gunman by necessity. Bowdre brought with him both quiet conviction and willingness to stand firm when others faltered. He wasn't reckless, but he was loyal, the kind of loyalty that would bind him to his friends until his final breath. So the charge, steadfast friendship turned into frontier defiance. Charlie Bowdre, a man who walked into the storm shoulder to shoulder with his companions. So Charlie Bowdre was born around 1848 in Wilkes County, Georgia. His family moved to Mississippi when he was still a child, raising him on hard farm labor. But Bowdre was restless. By the early 1870s, he turned his back on the plow and headed west. By 1874, he'd made it to Lincoln County, New Mexico. There, he found both business and brotherhood with Josiah Doc Scurlock. Together, the pair ran a cheese factory on the Gila River, an odd prelude for two men who would soon ride with outlaws.
That's what I was thinking.
And, Doc Scurlock, and I'm hoping some of the listeners have at least seen the movie. Doc Scurlock, played by Kiefer Sutherland in the movie. He was like a poet and very educated. The actual Doc Scurlock was very similar to that. Just to kind of set the scene for those of you that actually watch good movies.
I will watch it. Oh,
Frontier justice was never far. In July 1876, Bowdre joined a posse that stormed Lincoln's jail, dragged accused horse thief Jesus Largo into the street, and lynched him. He wasn't reckless by nature, but he wasn't afraid of violence either. Again, all of this stems from the murder of John Tunstall, and Charlie was there. He was right alongside the rest of the Regulators, and he was there at the Blackwater Creek killings on March 8th in 78. when he captured gunman William Morton and Frank Baker and Regulator defector William McCloskey, and all of them were executed, and that happens in the movie as well. He stood in the thick of things at the gunfight at Blazer's Mill, where he was wounded in the exchange with Buckshot Roberts. Roberts died, Brewer was killed, and Bowdre carried scars that never healed. He fought through the 5-day battle in July, holed up in McSween's house as it burned. He escaped that night with Billy and a handful of others, slipping into the shadows while McSween fell. After the war, Bowdre tried to settle. He worked for Thomas Yerby and Pete Maxwell, kept close to Billy, and married Manuela Herrera, the sister of Doc Scurlock's wife. And for a moment, it seemed that Bowdre might trade his rifle for family life. By 1880, the outlaw trail was wearing Bowdre down. He thought about surrender, even considered turning himself in over his role in Buckshot Roberts' death, but friendship tied him tighter than fear. When Billy the Kid gathered his band for one last run, Tom O'Phalliard, Dave Rudabaugh, who's played by Christian Slater, Billy Wilson, Charlie Bowdre, he rode along. December the 23rd, 1880, Stinking Springs. Pat Garrett's posse surrounded their hideout. Bowdre stepped outside to feed the horses, and a storm of bullets cut him down. Billy urged him to die fighting, quote, "Take a few of them with you." But Bowdre could barely stand. He stumbled forward, whispering, I wish. And then he fell, without ever drawing his gun. He was buried at Fort Sumner, laid in the earth beside Tom O'Phalliard. Less than a year later, Billy himself would join them. The verdict of time? Charlie Bowdre never led posses. He never claimed a crown. He never carved his name into Lincoln's power struggles. He was quiet, devout, often carrying a Bible in his pocket. But he followed his friends, stood his ground, and died in the dust beside them. His story is not of infamy or empire, but of loyalty. And in Lincoln County, loyalty was as dangerous as any bullet. Charlie Bowdre's loyalty was plain, steady, as a fence post in rough weather. But loyalty alone wasn't enough. The Regulators also needed grit, men willing to track rustlers over broken country and face down the barrel of another man's gun. That's where Frank McNab stepped in. A Scotsman turned cattle detective, McNab brought with him the hard-edged skills of a man who lived by pursuit and survival. He wasn't just muscle, he was method, the kind of presence that gave the Regulators teeth in the chase, and soon enough, a leader's voice when the fighting left them rudderless. The charge? Relentless pursuit of justice, no matter how bloody the trail. Frank McNab, the detective who became a captain. Frank McNab was born in Scotland, his exact date lost to history. He crossed the Atlantic not as a settler's child, but as a young man hunting opportunity. By the early 1870s, he was in the American Southwest working for Hunter Evans and Company, the outfit of cattle baron John Chisholm. McNab served as a cattle detective, the polite frontier term for hired gun against rustlers. His job was to track stolen herds across the desert, recover them when possible, and put lead into anybody standing in the way. On the Pecos frontier that made him feared, respected, and well acquainted with violence. So by 1875, Chisholm had shifted his empire into New Mexico, staking a kingdom along the Pecos. McNab came with him, already bloodied in the rustler wars. It was through Chisholm that McNab met Alexander McSween and John Tunstall, whose fight against the Murphy-Dolan monopoly aligned with Chisholm's interest. When Tunstall was assassinated, McNab was among the first to swear vengeance. Deputized with Brewer and the others, he became a founding member of the Regulators. At first, McNab served as Brewer's lieutenant. He rode in pursuit of William Morton and Frank Baker, accused in Tunstall's murder. Along that trail, when fellow Regulator William McCloskey appeared ready to turn on his comrades and aid the prisoners, McNab pulled the trigger himself. McCloskey fell dead, and Martin and Baker soon followed, gunned down in the dust. A killing most blamed on Billy the Kid, but one that happened under McNab's watch. So this is where Young Guns definitely got it wrong, because in the movie, Billy the Kid says to McCloskey, "Man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you sooner, you goddamn traitor." Boom! Blows it up. That is exactly what happened. So, and as a matter of fact, McNab isn't even in the movie, and he was like a bigger part of the whole story than some of the ones that made it into the movie. But for whatever reason, Hollywood didn't pick him. So
yeah, wasn't romantic enough.
Apparently not. I mean, it's a pretty freaking romantic story, though. The guy was a freaking range detective, and he chased wrestlers all over the damn place. I mean, that's a pretty freaking good story, but I don't know, they skipped him. So on April the 1st, 1878, McNab was in the ambush that cut down Sheriff William Brady and Deputy George Hinman, and he fired not just for vengeance, but to recover the warrants that Brady carried, documents that marked the Regulators as outlaws. And then at Blazer's Mill, McNab fought beside Brewer against Buckshot Roberts, where Brewer died. Roberts mortally was wounded, and McNab walked away alive. But by Regulators' vote, he then became their new captain, which is, again, odd. I guess they would have had to make the story or the movie as long as this podcast can end up being. That's probably why they didn't do it. But McNab's command lasted less than a month, because on April the 29th, 1878, he rode with Ab Saunders and Frank Coe near the Fritz Ranch. Sheriff George Pepin, backed by the Seven Rivers Warriors and Jesse Evans' gang, set an ambush. McNab fought hard, wounded, but scrambling into a gully for cover. There, Manuel Indian Segovia tracked him down and fired a shotgun blast that ended his life. Saunders was badly wounded, Coe captured, and the Regulators lost their second captain in less than 30 days. The Regulators answered in kind. By May, they stormed a Seven Rivers camp and gunned down Segovia, avenging McNab's death in the only currency the war allowed, which was blood. McNab was remembered as relentless, efficient, and at times ruthless. Killing McCloskey branded him controversial, but to the Regulators, he was decisive, a man who did what had to be done. His Scottish grit, honed on cattle trails and hardened in the desert, made him the natural successor to Brewer, if only briefly. After McNab fell, Doc Scurlock assumed command, but the Regulators were already unraveling under the weight of loss and vengeance. So the verdict of time? Frank McNab's life was a frontier riddle. A cattle detective sworn to defend property turned outlaw leader in a war where law itself was broken. His tenure was short, his death violent, but his presence proved that the Regulators were more than just Billy the Kid's gang. They were a company of men bound by vengeance, losing leaders one by one until nothing but legend remained. With Frank McNab cut down, the Regulators needed more than another gun. They needed a mind, someone literate, steady, and still willing to fight. Into that breach stepped Josiah Gordon Doc Scurlock, a cowboy who read poetry by firelight, carried the scar of a bullet through his jaw, and led men with both brains and steel. The charge? A philosopher with a six-shooter who turned from vigilante violence to family life and lived long enough to see the age of outlaws become legend. So Josiah Gordon Scurlock, Kiefer Sutherland's character, was born January 11th, 1849 in Tallapoosa County, Alabama, one of 11 children of Priestley Norman Scurlock and Esther Ann Brown. Unlike many frontier gunmen, Scurlock grew up educated. He briefly studied medicine in New Orleans, earning the nickname Doc. But book learning couldn't cage him, so by 1870, restless for the wider world, Scurlock headed south into Mexico. There, in a dusty confrontation, he survived the kind of fight that could have ended him early. Shot through the mouth, teeth shattered, the bullet tearing out the back of his neck. He lived, killed his attacker, and carried the scar for the rest of his life. That brush with death only deepened his resolve. He turned cowboy, riding for John Chisholm in Texas, trailing cattle across the Southwest, battling rustlers and Apaches, and sometimes skimming the line into theft himself. So by 1874, Scurlock was in New Mexico, and he partnered with Charlie Bowdre to open a cheese factory on the Gila River.
Let's stop laughing at that.
It's crazy, isn't it? Later, moving to a ranch near Rio Ruidoso, but like so many small operators, he was soon entangled in debt to Lawrence Murphy's house, a reminder that monopoly had a stranglehold on even the most modest lives.
Cheese is expensive.
Cheese is expensive. Scurlock also had a taste for vigilant justice. In 1876, he and Bowdre, alongside the Koch cousins and Ab Saunders, hauled accused horse thief Jesus Largo out of Lincoln's jail and strung him up. It was a warning shot. The law was weak, and men like Scurlock were willing to supply their own. That same year, Scurlock married Maria Antonio Miguela Herrera. Together, they would raise 10 children, making him one of the few regulators to balance violence with a deeply rooted family life. And so he did not marry the China doll that was kept captive by Lawrence Murphy. That was Hollywood, but he's
Hollywood.
But he was played very well by Kiefer Sutherland. That role was very much like him, except Kiefer Sutherland was a little bit more timid than the actual Doc Scurlock was. Actual Doc Scurlock, he wouldn't take no shit from nobody. He was not afraid to fight. Not saying Doc in the movie was, but he was really kind of timid and all artsy fartsy and poetry and all that kind of stuff. And that was just not the case.
And fatherhood of 10 kids.
Yeah. And so when John Tunstall was murdered, Scurlock threw in with Brewer, Bowdre, Billy the Kid, and all the rest. The Regulators were born. We've told that story. So with Brewer dead and McNab gunned down, the mantle of leadership fell to Scurlock. He wasn't the loudest or the most flamboyant, but his men trusted his judgment. He led retaliatory strikes, including the killing of Manuel Segovia, avenging McNab, and he kept order when others were tempted to splinter. As a deputy under McSween's ally, Sheriff John Copeland, Scurlock gave the Regulators their last brush with legality. But once Governor Axtell stripped their commissions, they were outlaws for good. So by late 1878, Doc's patience for endless bloodshed waned. When Billy the Kid turned to wrestling John Chisholm's cattle, Scurlock stepped away. He chose life, not death. Scurlock then returned to Texas, first to Potter County and then to Eastland County. And there, the man who once led vigilantes became a postmaster, a rancher, and a community leader, and a poet. He raised his children, grew old with his wife, Maria Antonia, and died quietly of a heart attack on July 25th, 1929. He was buried in Eastland, Texas, a far cry from the smoke-filled streets of Lincoln. The verdict of time? Josiah Doc Scurlock stands apart from most of his Regulator brothers. He fought, killed, and led, but he lived long enough to lay down his guns. He wrote poetry, raised a family, and became a pillar of his community. His story is a reminder that the men of Lincoln were not just desperados. Some were thinkers, some were dreamers, some were men who wanted peace when the chance finally came. Okay, so I think that now is a good as place as any to end this. I know we've covered a lot of information. We still got the rest of the Regulators to talk about. Then we've got the whole Murphy Dolan side to talk about. And then we dive into the whole rest of the chaos. So there's just so many freaking players. And so that's why this is kind of fun and exciting and different than what we typically do, because we have 150 years of research and investigation into all of this. And so we have all of this information that we can collect. So it's really fun.
And if we let you, you would be here
all night.
for weeks.
Oh yeah, weeks and weeks. Absolutely. You know, it's so funny because we've got Rocky Mountain Reckoning, and a lot of those stories, there's like no information. You can't find anything.
No.
And then you dive into this, and it's like information load where
I don't know what to do with it all.
it's so crazy. And then inside my brain, my broken brain, where I have researched Billy the Kid for, probably 40 some years.
Mm-hmm.
I've been fascinated with Billy the Kid. I can remember my parents, I think my parents had to go to Billings or something like that. And I was left home alone. And so I got a ride down to the wheat market that we used to send it to Southford, and I rented it because it was rated R. No freaking way that was going to be allowed. And I rented
Because of your brother.
because my brother going to Porky's, yes. And so I can't remember exactly where my parents went, but they left me alone. And so I was like in charge of like irrigating and stuff. That was my life growing up. But I know I couldn't drive at the time, but I got to the store and I rented Young Guns and couldn't wait to get home and watch it. And then it is the movie that I drove people insane with, because there was a time I literally knew it word for word. I could recite the whole movie to you.
How mad were they when they found out?
No, I don't think they ever found out.
But you're reciting the movie to everybody.
I didn't recite it to them.
Oh, okay.
Throughout the years, I'd be like, have you seen Young Guns? And they'd be like, no. And so I'd put it in and watch it, and then I'd start reciting it and be like, would you shut up and just let me watch the movie? Yeah, that was what this movie was.
Oh, man.
So that triggered a lifetime of fascination with Billy the Kid. And so digging into this story is even more than it would be normally, because I love history, I love true crime. The two come together perfectly in this, but then I have this passion for like Billy the Kid.
Yeah.
It's really funny because as a kid, it was Billy the Kid and Crazy Horse. Those were like my two idols. And so I don't know why that is, but you
wanted to be an Indian outlaw.
Yeah, so when I was playing as a kid, like one day I'd be Billy the Kid, I'd be running around like shooting the bad guys, and the next day I'd be riding bareback, and I would be Crazy Horse, and I'd be running around killing the cowboys. So I don't know, it's just funny. But anyway, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Next episode, we got to talk about the rest of the Regulators, and then we'll, kind of start talking about the Murphy Dolan side, depending on time, as we kind of weave our way through this story, because there are a lot of moving pieces here. And then, unlike most of the stories that we talk about that's limited to like one tragic event, here we've got all of this shit going on,
Yeah, and you're balancing it in this, and yeah.
Morton and Baker get arrested, and then with McCloskey, they all get assassinated. And I've actually read letters that were written by Baker to, I believe it was his wife during that. And he says in those letters, Billy the Kid is determined to kill us. We're never going to make it alive. And then sure enough, they all get gunned down and killed. So anyway, a lot of fun information, a lot of super interesting stuff to talk about. And the unique part of this story is we're talking about one of the most famous outlaws of the American
Yeah.
But there's a real question whether I consider him an outlaw or not, because if put in the same situation, I think I would act exactly the same way. Like if I'm an orphan at 14 and then I meet this guy,
right?
He gives me a gun, and when I say that,
and a job and a life and a purpose.
Yeah. When I say that he was given a Winchester 73, if you're not a gun person, you don't have any clue what that means. But in the 1870s, giving somebody a Winchester 73 was like handing them life, because it was, it was 6-shooters at the time. And the Winchester 73 was really one of the very first repeating rifles. And it would shoot the same caliber that his handgun would shoot. So they would shoot the same one, but giving anybody that gun allowed them to not only defend themselves from a lot farther away, without having to line up with somebody on a street, basically, but it also allowed them to take game from a long ways away. They can now shoot deer, where with a pistol, that's very difficult to do, so And your other option was like black powder and shit like that, because this is that period of time, where repeating rifles are really taken over. And so, where you have like the peacemaker who's labeled the gun that won the West, really it was the Winchester 73 that won the West. So that was a huge gift to a young man at the time. And so put in that same situation, and then you kill my mentor and the one guy in my whole life who's actually treated me with any sort of respect and love.
Who didn't leave on his own, you took him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you think about it, his real dad deserted him. The only real love that he was given was from his mom, but no male gave him any.
This guy was the first father figure.
Absolutely. Ironically, being only like 5 or 6 years older than him.
But still.
He was still the father figure to him. And so that loyalty, I understand. And put in the same situation where you can't go to the law because the law is crooked. I done went to war too. So it'll be interesting how you and the listeners all kind of come out at the end of this, whether you're with me and think Billy was maybe not as much outlaw, or he was a hardened outlaw and killer.
Okay.
Who killed 21 men, one for each year of his life.
The next question, do you want me to watch the movie before we finish this, or wait?
Oh, you can definitely watch the movie.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, nothing will be given away.
Okay.
And that's kind of the fun part about these stories, is because they're so old. And I mean, I guess everybody's not like me and doesn't know like all the little intricacies about Billy the Kid's life. But it's just, you can definitely watch the movie, because obviously I'm going to reference it a lot, and you'll get those references. And so the listeners, I encourage you, if you haven't watched Young Guns, I would encourage you to watch both of them, because then you'll be ready for Young Guns 3, who rumor has it is going to be coming out, I think, in 2026 or 2027, which I'm freaking stoked about.
So excited.
Yeah, I mean, Lou Diamond Phillips is one of my favorite freaks.
I really like him a lot.
He's awesome. And he plays Chavez so freaking well. And he is an actual regulator that we will be talking about. And he's quite an interesting character as well. But I guess...
I don't think Lou Diamond Phillips should play anybody who's not interesting.
No, he's such a great actor.
Yeah, they're all interesting.
Yeah. And I actually was reading a little article about the friendship that him and Graham Greene formed, and they were really, because both of them, they were on Longmire together. Yeah. And I mean, it
had to be adversaries.
Everybody that worked with him as the same thing. Kevin Costner said the same thing. He was like awesome to work with. Like every movie the guy's been in, the actors that worked with him said he was awesome. So rest in peace, brother, because he gave us some really, really great movies.
So many things he was in.
So many, and all of them were awesome. And honestly, like Lou Diamond Phillips, I could say the same thing about like pretty much every movie that guy's been in. I have freaking really liked.
Yeah.
Emilio Estevez, like Men at Work, I could take it or leave it, whatever. But the guy is a freaking good actor. And you talk about a world-class acting family, Art Machine, Emilio Estevez.
Yeah.
His brother went off the rails a little bit, but
because he's winning.
He was a good freaking actor, man. And the part that he played in Young Guns, he really played it good as Dick Brewer. So yeah, I encourage all of you to watch both of the Young Guns, and yeah, we'll pick this back up on the next episode. So obviously that brings part 1 of our look into Billy the Kid to a close. The boy swept into a war, a fugitive forged by circumstance, and a legend that refuses to die. In part 2, we're going to continue on this journey. We'll talk about the bloody showdowns that carved the Regulators' path and the choices that made history.
In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed to wherever you listen, and share it with a friend who loves history as well. Outlaws, or just a good story from the Old West, or just listening to how passionate John is about this.
Much of a nutball I am.
I said passionate.
I said nutball.
Okay, fine.
If you want to do more than listen, we've built ways for you to get involved. Through our Adopt a Victim program, you can pick a case and help us dig. combing through sources, piecing together records, and keeping these forgotten lives alive through research.
And if you want to take an even more active role, you can join the Dark Dialogue Collective. That's where listeners sign up to help on searches, support families, and be part of the hands-on work that pushes these stories forward.
You can also support us on Patreon, Substack, or Ko-fi. Every bit of support helps keep the fire burning and the research alive.
And we always want to hear from you. Drop us a line at info@darkdialogue.com with your theories, your feedback, or just to say hello.
This has been Dark Dialogue, Gallows and Gunfights. Until next time, let the past take the stand and the guilty face the gallows.